and let Rabbi Meirfeld teach us. Let's get started.
Okay. Continuing with the malacha of mevashel, which is cooking. The second part is the next part here is it's actually quite a long section. Kli sheni, which means kli, vessel, sheni, the second vessel. When mixing liquids, a distinction is made between pouring the hot liquid into a kli sheni beforehand or afterwards. If one wishes to mix into a cup or bowl some hot water with a small amount of cold liquid, the hot water should be poured first. It will be cooled by the contact with the cup and will not then cause a cooking effect on the cold liquid, which is subsequently added, because it will be cooled enough, not to cool down enough to when the cold water is added that it won't cook it. Example: a hot orange drink may be made by first pouring the hot water into a cup and adding the juice afterwards. Question: what may be put into a kli sheni before hot liquid is poured into it? Solid foods fully cooked, or hot or warm pre-boiled liquids. If tea essence was prepared before Shabbos and has remained warm by standing in a pot or an urn, it is considered a warm pre-boiled liquid. It may therefore be put into a kli sheni before the hot water is added, but if the essence is cold, the hot water must be poured first. A baby's milk bottle may be heated by pouring hot water on it, even if the milk inside is cold. Because of a rule which forbids covering items completely with substances which increase temperatures. This is known as hatmana, literally insulation. Another way of warming a baby bottle or any cold drink is to add some hot water, but not enough to allow the mixture to reach 45 degrees C. When one is pouring from a kettle or urn, one must ensure that the cup is clean and dry, since any cold drop of water is cooked by the hot water which is poured into it. But there is no need to dry the cup before it is refilled if the drops which have remained in the cup are still a little warm. Now let's leave it at that because it's very technical here. I will continue with that tomorrow. That's it. So basically, temperatures can't be increased. So that's why you pour the hot in first. The hot will cool down to a reasonable enough temperature that if you add another liquid to it, it won't actually cook it, because the sides of the vessel of the cup will cool it down. So we'll continue with that tomorrow. So it's more technical. I don't want to confuse myself and us.
Thank you. Thanks, Rob.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Cohen and King and Rosh Hashiva.
And Kabbalist.
Okay, so Kev, that was good. I mean, I learn every time you teach us. I honestly learn. So I really appreciate it.
Yeah. So I think the basic thing is just put the hot water in first, the boiling water, and leave it a little bit so it cools down in the vessel. And then when you've added another liquid, it won't cook it. That's it.
Okay. So, right, just a couple of points on Derech Hashem. So, what we learned is that if Hashem wants to bestow his good, that in order for man to enjoy the good, he has to be the true deserving recipient of it. It's almost like if you're given charity, it's not as dignified as being given the opportunity to be entrepreneurial or perhaps work for somebody and help build something for them and for you. Obviously, the one has a greater sense of accomplishment because although you were given the opportunity, it's yours. You've made it yours. So, I mean, that feeling that we have in us is based on the fact that we are built to give, not built to take. And there's no harm in taking because there are times in our lives where we have to take. When we get older and we no longer can earn a living, or sometimes there's an economic reversal point in a person's situation or in the greater economy, or when one's younger, where they depend on their parents and teachers for help, etc. But principally, what's known as our glory years is when we take our potential to give to others. Obviously, all of this I'm telling you off ad hoc. It's not from the book. It's just on the principles of the book. So what this book does say is that this is before the sin of Adam Arishon. It says that, look, in essence, God alone is perfection. There's a fault in every human being, and that fault is when we can't perceive God properly. The absence of his good and concealment of Hashem's presence, that in itself is a fault of the way we look at the world. And obviously the Satan means obstruction, obstructs our ability to see Hashem in the world clearly. So everything that we do has an effect on creation, meaning the more we corrupt the world, the more it conceals God's light. And the more we elevate, the more it has an effect on nature. So nature has an effect on us, and we have an effect on nature. It's a vicious circle. Meaning, if you just look at it literally, if you're around negative people and people that do bad, it's going to rub off on you. And your negativity will add to their negativity as well. So basically, there's a unique creature which stands balanced between the elements of perfection and the elements of deficiency, which in turn are the results of God's illumination and concealment. When this creature strengthens himself, striving for elements of perfection, incorporating them into his being, this is a way in which we cling to Hashem, blessed be his name, as he is their root and source. The more elements of perfection this creature incorporates into itself, the stronger will be his association and bond to God. He becomes, so to speak, attached, devakut, to God himself, cleaving, deriving both pleasure and perfection from his goodness, while he himself is the master of this good and perfection. When it says he himself is the master, it's using a lowercase h, meaning man itself has mastered himself, having acquired them by choosing them. Now, I'm not going to go into it fully in depth because we're going to see there was a difference but before the sin and after the sin. So before the sin of Adam Arishon, things stood in a perfect balance. After the sin, things are obviously far more concealed. So we're going to start off and share the screen and go for the current Mishnah. Sorry, guys, today's news kind of threw me a little off, so I didn't prepare. I was in a bit of
Shock.
tiz, but then I figured whatever will be. So let me just share my screen. All right. So I'll tell you who I want. Mate, Art, you want to read?
Hold on. Okay. 1 second. Okay. If the ox of a competent person gores the ox of a deaf mute, a deranged person, or a minor, the owner is liable. But if the ox of a deaf mute, a deranged person, or a minor gored the ox of a competent person, the owner is exempt. If the ox of a deaf mute, deranged person, or a minor gored, the court appoints for them an agent to watch over the ox, and the court accepts testimony regarding their oxen in the presence of the agent. If after the ox enters the jurisdiction of the agent it becomes muad, a deaf mute gains hearing and speech, the deranged person becomes sane, or a minor becomes an adult, the muad ox reverts to its tam status. These are the words of Rabbi Meir. But Rabbi Yossi says, the ox remains in its present muad state, an unrelated ruling. An ox of the arena that killed a person is not liable to death, for in the verse that mandates the death penalty for an ox that is killed, it is stated, if an ox gores, this implies, but not an ox that is compelled to gore.
Okay, well read. Okay. All right, so just a couple of points on the Mishnah that I just want to bring up to you guys. I mean, some of it's going to be, pretty self-evident. Is that there's a term that you saw in the Mishnah, pikayach. So what does pikayach mean? It's a term which literally means open. So what do we mean open? Is that if somebody can't hear, their hearing is not open, so to speak, colloquially. If they can't see properly, their eyesight isn't open. If they're deaf mute, their mouth is not open. So pikach is a term used for a normal person. One whose faculties are open, basically. So if you're not a deaf mute, deranged, or a minor, that's pretty straightforward. So where do we get this from? Well, it's in Ibn Ezra's commentary to Shemot, chapter 4, verse 11. There's Isaiah, chapter 42, verse 7 to 20, and it uses this term quite often. It just means open, as in open with the ability to do so. Now, whenever you see the word shoteh, shoteh means somebody that doesn't, they're sandwiched short of a picnic. Am I making sense, guys? They don't have all their oars in the water.
Yeah, that's a very nice way of saying it. Though.
Isn't it always someone who's a liar, also no liar, or who doesn't talk the truth? It also might mean that.
So it's interesting you should say that, because that's bringing a greater message. Anybody that lies is deranged.
Oh, okay.
They're deranged. Why? If we live in a world of truth, where there should be something that's evident or not evident, that's a person that's in touch with reality. Somebody that doesn't portray reality is deranged. There's something deranged within them at that state. Doesn't mean permanently, but it's certainly as far as the viewpoint is concerned. So it is used in that term too. So basically, anybody that is a deaf, mute, deranged, or a minor, they're regarded, at least from a legal standpoint, as mentally incompetent. So what do we mean by mentally competent? It means they haven't developed their full mental competency. Anybody that's got teenagers will tell you. It has also haven't developed their full emotional and intellectual point of maturity. Although from a halachic standpoint, if you sexually at a mature phrase, you are liable. However, it does state that there's a difference between being sexually mature at 13 and being able to go under the chuppah at 18. They even have a period of time where they realize that there has to be that gap. Does that make sense, guys? Most of the time people went under the chuppah at 18, not at 13, unless it was Romeo and Juliet, and look how that turned out. All right. So one thing I wanted to tell you is that where do we get this thing that a deaf, mute, deranged person or a minor is not liable for their actions? Well, there are many sources. I mean, if we have a look, for example, in the 87th daf, it says a deaf, mute, deranged person and a minor, one who wounds them is liable, but if they wound others, they are exempt. Why are they exempt, guys?
Because they don't have all the oars in the
They don't understand. No intention. Yeah.
Yeah, they can't measure consequence. They can't measure consequence. So just as these three are exempt from paying for damage they personally inflict, they're also exempt from paying damages that their property inflicts. Now you might say, why on earth give them property? They might have inherited it. We don't know, but it doesn't deserve to be taken away from them. All right. So just one thing to let you know is that they aren't accountable for their actions. And even though the possessions are legally their own, if their property damages anybody else, they're not liable, just like they're not liable if they're damaged. But there have to be mechanisms that are put in place, why? To protect the public. So now Rashi raises the following issue. So we're saying, look, you kind of have a slight difference here. So it generally was the practice of the court, the Sanhedrin or the Beis Din, to appoint an agent to watch over the oxen of those who, on account of their incompetence, are incapable of safeguarding the animals themselves. So it didn't mean that the animals were entitled to be taken away from them. but it doesn't entitle them to damage either. So obviously it's ensuring the animals wouldn't inflict damage upon the property of others. So what happens is the agent takes the place of the owner. In what regard? Legally. Because what happens is, in order for your ox to become muad, the owner has to be warned. Remember, we did a daf and say, is the animal muad or is the owner muad? Do you remember that daf? It was the 16th daf. Do you remember?
Yeah. Yes.
I think it was the 16th daf. And what we said is, look, it has to be both. The fact of it is the owner has to be warned. So if they talk about somebody where the owner is also overseas, and he's included into this list because he wasn't there to be warned. So why do they appoint a court agent? In order that they can act as a proxy on behalf of those that are mentally incompetent. And if the ox keeps damaging, it's warned in front of the presence of the agent, which works as a proxy for those that are mentally incompetent, because they're not going to process the message of muad. So Rashi says, let the testimony be presented in the presence of the agent, and let the damaged party collect damages. Rashi explains, based on this Gemara, that the Mishnah is basically discussing a case where the animal is tam. So in order for it to become a muad, you have to warn somebody, so the agent becomes your warning party. But the problem is, Rashi said, is that this particular Tana of the Mishnah holds that the agent is not empowered to allow the damaged party to collect damages from the body of the tam when the tam damages. And the payment that comes migufa from the animal itself is not used in terms of payment. We learned this in 16b. Okay, I'm going to tell you why just now. So despite the appointment of an agent, the three remain exempt. So this is a little bit difficult to understand. Why is it difficult to understand? Well, what's the point of having an agent? So there are 2 points. Pardon?
What is the point then? Because the agent can't pay you. It's not technically the owner.
Okay, so the agent has got 2 points.
Okay.
So the first point that the agent has is the fact that he's meant to be there as a legal guardian to protect the animal from damaging other people, because you've got 2 alternatives. You can either take away their property, which is not fair, or alternatively, make somebody guard the oxen. Fine. But, so that's your first point, is looking after the animal. But who, in fact, is negligent if the animal goes again? If it's under the custodianship or guardianship of the court-appointed agent. Kev, you falling asleep? A little bit. We can see you nodding. We don't mind.
Okay, I'm hearing you. Yeah. I'm tired.
So
Only
what
we can bottle you, James. Only we can bottle you, hey?
Yeah, if only you can bottle me to put it in as a benzodiazepine next to your bed. So
I ran and had coffee and I had a turbovite, so hopefully.
Listen, I know I'm boring. I won't put you through this for long. Don't worry. So all
I
I'm saying is,
I mustn't do that.
no, you
Also
can.
puts you to sleep. No, it makes you full, tires you. Okay.
So no, you can. So listen, there's 2 reasons for a court-appointed agent: to look after the animal. So whose fault is it? If he's a court-appointed agent and it goes again, it's the agent's fault.
Mm.
So one of the discussions in the Gemara is, well, why don't we make the agent responsible? And one of the quick answers for it is that there's no quick answer. I'll give it to you another time. But the thing of it is, so there's that as a factor to use the agent to protect the incompetent animal from goring you. And the second reason is to make sure that the agent can work as a representative and a proxy where the animal becomes muad and you pay damages. In other words, that's used as a responsible party. Only this Tana says that you cannot make an agent, you cannot make those that are mentally incompetent pay. Okay?
They're not liable.
They're not liable. So I'm going to go through 2 reasons very quickly before I go through it in length. Firstly, if you pay the agent, this is the bottom line. If you pay the agent, it's going to cost the estate a fortune. It's like keeping your goods in storage, right? If you've got 20 grand's worth of goods in storage, but you're paying 1,000 rand a month, or 1,500 rand, after about a year, your goods are no longer worth being stored because you're spending more to store the goods than the goods are worth. So what happens is you're eating through capital. That's the bottom line. Now, if the agent of the court is paying the agent, okay, somebody's paying. So either the incompetents are paying out of their estate, or at which case having the animal has no point because eventually you're spending more to look after the animals than they're worth. So how does it work in the farming community? Well, you've got 200 cattle. Then it pays you because it's a viable business. But if you've got one donkey and one ox that keeps damaging, it's easier to shoot them in the head and sell the meat than it is to pay a court-appointed agent. Now, you might say, well, it's the Sanhedrin or the Beis Din's fault. They've got a community responsibility. Why should they use, because they're getting the money from somewhere. Where are they getting the money? From taxes from the Jewish people. So why should the Jewish people pay to sustain two damaging animals? Which it comes out here that the agent seems to be at a certain point either volunteering or going really below market value to help these poor people. Now, if the agent becomes responsible for damage, we learned this, that say somebody, you ask them to look after your property, and then you're going to sue them for breaking something of yours, but they're doing you a favor because you're going to Australia on holiday. They're going to say, listen, get somebody else to look after your place. I don't need their responsibility. So that's what's happening here with a court-appointed agent. They're going to turn around and say, listen, you're making me responsible to pay. I don't need it. You're not paying me enough to pay damages worth tens of thousands if you're paying me a couple of hundred shekels. So either the agent was earning low, or he was doing it at a subsidized rate, or he wasn't paid. That's the deduction that I could find here. So therefore, if you make the agent responsible, you wouldn't have any volunteers. Okay? But by the same token, why then, according to the other Tana, do you make the incompetence responsible? Because it's saying there is an opinion that says the agents will feel terrible if people that are intellectually diminished are having to pay because he wasn't responsible. That sort of guilt that a Jew would have, making another Jew pay, would make him much more diligent than if the person that he was guarding it for had no responsibility to pay. It doesn't seem to address the question why he doesn't feel bad if by his lack of looking after the animal it would damage some other Jew. But I think we all have a lot more empathy for somebody that's retarded who's under our care than somebody that's screaming at us because we backed our car out of the driveway and it hit their car. Our empathy levels seem to directly reduce to the proportion that they scream at us and pick and pay. Just sharing. And this Tana holds at 16b. There's a very simple reason why we don't. Why there's no tam payment, okay, from the body of the animal, because tam has two leniencies: half payment damage from migufa, from the body of the animal. So what we learned in 16b is we learned that orphans can't have debts taken away from them in movable property, only in fixed property. Okay, so there are three types of people that are mentally incompetent: minors, which are orphans. In other words, they can't make capacity decisions. Deranged people and people that are deaf or mute, etc. So they're all under one category. So this Tana holds it's not just orphans, but anybody in the vulnerable category that a creditor cannot actually touch their movable property, only fixed property. So what's the thing with muad? Is you're taking from choice property. You can take it from an orphan. Okay, but you can't take movable property. So what's the counter argument to that? Well, the counter argument is very simple, is that there are cases where you do such a thing, because if an orphan, for example, the father took out a loan from some non-Jews that are charging heavy interest, because Jews can't charge interest with other Jews, then, or a woman's ketubah, for example, things that accrue a high interest level, because in that case, they quickly pay off the debt, even a movable property, because the interest will outstrip the asset in a certain period of time. So what happens with a woman's ketubah if she gets divorced or the husband dies? She needs to be paid out. Otherwise, the children of that estate have to actually support her every month. But it could be her support means more, would be more than her payout for the ketubah. In other words, after 6 months, she might have used up the money of the payment of the ketubah, but if they only wake up after a year, they've been draining their coffers, making sure she's well looked after every month until the ketubah is sorted out. So in that particular case, there's an urgency or a loan from a non-Jew that the estate pays it off, even from movable property, so that the orphans don't further degenerate with the losing more in interest in the capital value of what that asset's worth. That's quite a sight, Arthur.
You said capital value. Arthur, why you said that to Arthur?
Yeah, capital value.
I have no idea what this cat's doing. You know what? He's going mad. Sniffing my head.
It's got a lot of capital value, Arthur. That's what a cat.
So, well, this Kabb is busy telling you that base. Yeah. So basically, there's two issues here, and I'm just going to share my screen a second. So it depends if you're holding by the Tana or by maybe some of the rabbis. Let me just show you what the issue is. Look here. It says, if the ox of a deaf, mute, or deranged person or a minor gored, the court appoints for them an agent to watch over the ox, and the court accepts testimony regarding their oxen in the presence of the agent. That's a complete contradiction to the previous statement, which says, if the ox of a deaf, mute, or deranged person or minor gored the ox of a competent person, the owner is exempt. So which is it? Is the owner exempt, or does the court appoint an agent and then the court has to accept testimony because the agent works as a proxy in order to pay out the damaged parties? Which is it? The two are contradiction. Okay? So one of the issues that we're going to be unfolding is that it's not really a contradiction, because there's some of the opinions that turn around and say, look, firstly, there was a time there was an incident, and then the court woke up and thought, hang on a second, they might not be able to extract money from these incompetent people, but they don't want the ox to go further. So then they appoint a agent to act as a guardian with the animal. So then in that particular case, they've taken remedies. Then what happens if it happens again? Then that agent is used where you can provide testimony, and that agent, being a competent person, works on proxy with the incompetent owners and accepts the testimony given. So even if you hold, according to this Tana, that you can't extract from a tam because it's movable property, because you're taking from the gufa of the attacking animal, by the time it becomes muad, you can pay from choice property. Of course you can, even with an orphan and the categories that go under an orphan. Does that make sense? So in that particular case, you still would have to give the testimony to the court-appointed agent in order so that it becomes muad. So then on the fourth occurrence, they basically sell the animal. They basically have to pay the cash equivalent or sell the animal for cash. But it's not because they're taking from the body of the animal. If there's no other assets, they can sell barley. But it comes under the category then of fixed property or real property, so to speak. So you still need the court-appointed agent in order to warn. The reason the Mishnah says in the first instance you don't is because it happened for the first time. It's only afterwards you wake up and you think maybe there should be somebody competent looking after the animal. Am I making sense, guys?
Yeah, absolutely. Up until that point, no one was aware that the incompetent person wasn't coping.
Correct.
Or that they were incompetent. So now they know. So now they've appointed an agent.
Correct. And then there was that extra point. I don't know if you can see where it's talking about if the ox enters the jurisdiction of the agent and becomes a muad, the deaf mute gains hearing and speech, the deranged person becomes sane, or the minor becomes an adult, the muad ox reverts to its tam status. These are the words of Rabbi Meir, but Rabbi Yossi says the ox remains in its present muad state. So this is the thing that happens, is that at the point that it becomes under the care of the agent, it seems that the agent is either doing it at a discounted rate or volunteering. So he doesn't have time to fully live on the property of the dysfunctional person, okay, because it's not his full-time job. What he does they might brand the oxen or whatever, but he takes it to his premises to look after. Because he can't look after it. The argument comes in the Gemara, says, well, look, why don't we stretch this argument and say, why doesn't a court-appointed person look after the mentally incompetent anyway? Because even if the animals don't damage, they damage. And it's saying, well, who has the time to run after these people? So either it seems that they have to be in an institution or taken care of in a place where one person isn't running around. It's either that they go to a place, perhaps, but the animals certainly go to the place under the agent's care. So that's that jurisdiction. Now, if a minor suddenly becomes an adult, he's legally responsible. It then returns the animal, for example, to the minor that's become a full legal adult to his premises. So the argument in the Gemara, with there's a tonight dispute, does it revert back to tam status? Now, what's the logic of it referring back to tam status? Very simple. I could say to you, look, I was a minor. I've now become an adult. I legally wasn't responsible. The ox was muad. But who made it muad? It was the agent. And I'm going to have to pay now if it damages again. Maybe if you gave it to me, I would have looked after it better. So how can you make it remain muad? Because it only damaged in the care of the agent that was supposed to protect me. So therefore, if it's coming back to me, make it tam. If I mess up, then make me muad. But why should I pay for the agent's muad? There's a counter argument, which so that is obviously the discussion of Rabbi Meir. Okay, so that says, listen, that's the reason it goes back to tam. Rab Yossi says the ox remains in its present state. What's that argument about? Well, very simple. Is you could say, listen, if the agent who was fully competent, this ox did damage, do you think somebody that didn't have mental capacity and has suddenly come right for 2 minutes is going to do a better job? You know what I'm saying? It's saying, and also a person that's damaged. If this ox is a habitual gorer, it's more testimony to the nature of the animal than the testimony of the person looking after it. So then why should a person that get damaged have this problem? That they're only getting a fraction of their payment. That's the other side of the coin. Okay. Then the last part of the Mishnah, which is a completely unrelated ruling. So it's talking about a coliseum. If an animal is taught to go, why put down the animal? It's not the animal's fault. Well, there's a whole lot of questions on that, but since it's not the basis of this particular Gemara, we're not going to go into it. I've got no doubt.
When they said arena, like the Colosseum, is that what it meant by arena?
Yeah, so arena means that for sport, you'd either have two oxen attacking each other, or you'd have a person and an oxen in the arena. So they never killed the animal because it wasn't the animal's fault. I mean, personally, an animal that's been trained to injure, I wouldn't want it around. I'd prefer it as fillet. But that's me. But I don't know. And then what do you do for kofir payment when it's... how do you train an animal to be a killer animal and then you don't pay for kofir? You've created an irresponsible animal. So that's another dispute. All right, so let's go directly to the Gemara and unravel this. I've given a bit of a summary in my head. I hope you guys... So the Gemara obviously points out this first contradiction between the Mishnah's first and second ruling. So the Mishnah is self-contradictory. Why? Because it first says, if the ox of a deaf, mute, a deranged person or a minor brought the ox of a competent person, the owner is exempt. We see that in the case of Tam, the court does not appoint an agent to allow the damaged party to collect the half payment damage from the animal's body. Okay, even if the court appointed an agent to watch over the Tam ox, if the ox then gores, the agent is not empowered to collect collection of the half damaged Tam payment from the body of the animal. So let's just get this clear. What's the first part of the Mishnah saying, guys? Is that there's no payment if a deaf, mute, deranged person or a minor ox gores that of a competent person. There's an exemption. So it says it's an exemption in two ways, that those three people are not liable, and even if you have a court-appointed agent, you can't collect the tam payment from the body of the animal. I've discussed the reasons why.
Yeah.
Fine. Then you've got a second point to consider, which is the second clause, which says if the ox of a deaf, mute, a deranged person or a minor galled, the court appoints for them an agent to watch over the ox, and the court accepts testimony regarding the oxen in the presence of the agent. We see that in this case of the tam, the court does appoint for them an agent to allow the damaged party to collect the half damage payment from the animal's body. In other words, the agent is thus empowered. These two courses are contradictory. Okay? Now, before I read from the Gemara to resolve the contradiction, any thoughts, guys?
Just what's the contradiction here? The contradiction is agent is appointed.
I'll repeat it. The first case is as follows. I'll think of it in terms of left and right. First case, if a mentally incompetent person upon which you've got a deaf, mute, a minor, and a deranged person, their ox damages a competent person, they are exempt. Under the same token, even if a court appoints an agent, that agent is not a proxy on behalf of the three incompetents to pay for tam from the body of the attacking animal. No, not for tam. So it says there's exemption in the first part of the Mishnah. The second part of the Mishnah says no. In fact, the court does appoint an agent, and that agent acts as a accepting testimony from the witnesses in order to make to take responsibility for payment for the damage that the incompetence oxes have caused them. So we have what you call an apparent contradiction. Okay. All right. Let me just check something here a sec. So there's a thing in Shmot chapter 21, verse 29, which uses a term. There's a verse that says, V'hu'ed bivalav, which means, and it was testified against the owner. So this is a biblical enactment that you have to fulfill the requirement that it has to be in presence of the owner, but if the owner is not mentally competent, it has to then be in the presence of an agent. So we're talking about in the one case where the agent is not empowered, or you can't collect from incompetence, or the other case where the agent is empowered and you can collect from them because they can listen to the testimony of the warnings and accept that on behalf of the mental incompetence. Okay? Now, why do you think there's this contradiction, guys? Any thoughts from your Chazorah on Shabbos?
First, it's not necessary to appoint an agent in the first instance when incompetent or deranged person's ox attacks a competent person. There's no liability. So why there's no point in appointing an agent. It's not necessary because no damages are going to be levied.
Okay. So you saying, why are you saying there's no point because the Mishnah says somebody that's mentally incompetent or minor doesn't have to pay? Is that what you're saying?
No. So what's the point of an agent? It's not necessary to have an agent appointed.
Okay, that's a good point. So look,
I feel it is necessary to have an agent. Why? Because firstly, the agent will make sure, to his best of his ability, that the animal doesn't go again. You'll have a lot more control because the other guy doesn't realize what it's doing. Okay, so there's sort of that barrier there because when you're not with things 100%, you don't notice your animal attacking someone or doing something ordinary. You just think it's your animal. Okay. So it's a benefit to actually the public. Okay, that's just my opinion. I mean,
okay, so you're both right. In other words, Tosfot sees it basically more like Arthur that Well, look, the bottom line is even Rashi says that at the end of the day, what has to happen is that you have to have a society where animals can't run amok, that there can be some sort of a sanity and collection process. And if those people can't look after it, they either have the animals taken away, but they don't deserve to lose the animals permanently. So the animals are taken to a place where they can be looked after. Generally, it seems that the agent himself, although it's court appointed, doesn't get paid because I think he puts them in their, they get branded, those animals, and they get put in the shelter with the other animals. Do you know what I'm saying? That the guy has himself, the agent has himself, from what it seems, like what I've read. So that, in other words, he might get paid for the food or whatever, but not for actually looking after the animal, which is why we don't make this agent liable if something goes wrong, because he doesn't need the drama. So, also, Tosfot has a ruling, Gavin, this is interesting, right? Is that apart from the leniency of the half payment damage and that it's only paid from the animal's body, there's a leniency with regards to exempting incompetent owners from payment for its damages. Because he says, remember there was that discussion where and other Rishonim discussed that is it compensation or is it a knas, a penalty? Remember this, the tam payment.
Yeah.
Is it a penalty because you know it's teaching you that you should really have looked after your animal? Is it compensation for the damaged party? So if you hold it, it's a knas, a penalty. We don't give penalties to people that are not mentally functional. We just don't. You don't penalize them, you try and solve a problem. So that's part of why we also don't do it. But Kevin's right in that the first time, well, Kevin, there's no warning when your animal damages the first time. The court sees there's a problem and they see there's going to be a further problem. So the agent, in one opinion, is meant to be a preventative measure, and the other hand is meant to stand for testimony. So even if you want to say that the agent in that case is empowered to listen to testimony, he's only, according to one opinion, empowered to listen to testimony at the point where the muad takes precedence. Because while it's tam, it's considered movable property. So he hears the testimony 3 times, and on the 4th time, the incompetent person has to pay the full payment damages from choice property. But up until that time, it's the testimony just to get to that status of muad from the agent's point of view. And the court is hoping that the agent will feel bad enough so it doesn't get to that stage because he doesn't want to make the problem worse. He was put there to solve the problem. There's another opinion that says, well, even if it's done, even according to the other...
understand this, Damon.
Yeah?
Okay.
Just one
Okay,
last
so what
point.
you're saying,
According to the other Tanaim, not just this Tana, they're saying even if it's tam, even if it's tam, you still have to make payments, because there was damage. Okay, what am I saying?
What I'm trying to figure out, the one guy's saying, okay, so on the one side, he's exempt from tam until it gets to muad. If the guy is deaf, mute, or whatever, mentally deranged or whatever, where a regular guy is not exempt from tam payments. That's the difference on that side. But the other guy's saying, sorry, the other rabbi you met, sorry, my blank. The other guy says no. Whether whatever it is, he still has to pay tam. The deaf, mute, whatever, still has to pay tam and responsible for damages, just like everybody else. That's what those are 2 sides of the argument.
Yeah. Okay. So just to make it a little bit clearer, your first side of the argument is that exactly that those that are mentally incompetent are exempt no matter what. Okay. Or under that exemption status, that the court-appointed agent is there just to make sure that the animal goes into his care. But again, he's not empowered to testify, to work as listening to testimony as a proxy for the incompetence, and therefore the incompetence don't have to pay. Okay? At least on a as far as that's concerned. Then you have the other side that said that the agent has got 2 purposes: to look after the animal and act as a proxy where they are deemed as the owners, that the testimony against this animal is given, and according to where they are given or made the proxy, they are either made the proxy for the sole purpose at listening to testimony more than 3 times, so that when the animal becomes muad, even according to this particular Tana that says you don't pay for tam because it's movable property, because tam comes from the body of the attacking animal, which is movable property, you still would have to have somebody responsible to listen to the testimony in order to pay for when the animal becomes muad, when the court-appointed agent is enabled as a proxy on behalf of the incompetents, not just to look after the animal. There's another opinion that says, listen, he's a proxy even for tam damages. Because why? Because the tam damage at the end of the day is still damaged, and the person, the incompetent is not entitled to pay while he's there. But once the agent takes over, it's at that point that we make the incompetents responsible, because they've got a responsible person looking after the animal. Does that make sense? As to why that the incompetents have to pay, not the agent, because nobody would volunteer for it. And the Gemara is saying that that's why they never enacted a stringency against the agent. There's another opinion that says that the agent has to pay, and that when the minor grows up, he has to pay back the agent. So it stings the agent in the beginning, but it doesn't answer the question. If somebody's insane, how are they going to pay you back? Are they going to suddenly become sane? So not all the issues have been dealt with, as long as you get the crux of it. So how do we, the Gemara resolves the contradiction as follows. This is what the Mishnah means to teach in its second clause. And if the oxen of the deaf, mute, the deranged person, or the minor becomes established as gorers, the court appoints for them an agent to watch over the oxen, and the court accepts testimony regarding the oxen in the presence of the agent, and we render the oxen muad, so that if it gores again, there's an obligation to pay full damages from choice property. Okay?
But it only becomes muad if the agent's appointed after the first goring, like Kevin suggested, or like it's suggested here, and it won't become muad after the first or second goring. It will only become muad after the third, correct? Not just because an agent's appointed that it becomes muad.
So right, instead of it becoming muad on the 4th goring, it would become muad on the 5th goring, because you wouldn't have 3 other gorings. That first goring technically doesn't count, because there was nobody to hear that goring that was competent. You're right. So instead of, it needs 3 gorings, on the 4th one you muad. Okay? Remember there was
Yeah.
So in this case, it would be a 5th. You're absolutely correct.
Not a 5th, a 4th. 3 plus 1.
No, a 5th. Because what had happened is you have to have 3 strikes, and then the 4th strike you pay in full.
But Rava and
so the first scoring is with the deaf mute being there. The other 3 are with the agent, and then the next one would be with the agent again.
No. I'm going to explain it. There was a discussion we had. Do you remember, Gavin, on the previous case when we were talking about Nida, and then an ox that gored, refrained, etc.
Okay.
Remember that? So there was an argument with Shmuel and Rav. Okay?
One says 3 days, the one says 4 days.
Yeah, no.
One's on the third attempt, one's on the 4th attempt.
The general opinion is it takes 3 warnings on the 4th attempt, it's muad. So in this case, it would be 3 warnings after the agent was appointed, because he's competent to hear testimony. So it's actually, instead of on the 4th occurrence of goring the animal's muad, it would be on the 5th occurrence.
So the 4th occurrence is rough.
I think it's Shmuel.
I thought his was on the 3rd, and I thought not Shlomo. What's his name?
No. I think Rav is more lenient than Shmuel. I think Shmuel is
1 day extra.
Yeah. So what we're saying is here, it's even more. Why? Because whatever Rav said, you'd add 1. Whatever Shmuel said, you'd add 1. Because
correct, that's what I'm saying.
I'm agreeing with you.
Yeah, that makes it better. Yeah.
So look, All right, so that's fine. So look, the so all right, so that's pretty straightforward. So that's the way it got reconciled. Let me see how much time have I got left? 10
10 minutes, yeah.
Now let's just fly through. All right. So the second clause speaks not of the empowerment of the agent to allow collection from the body of the tum, but of his empowerment with regard to ultimately rendering the ox a muad. Although the court does not authorize him with regard to the former, it does authorize him with regard to the latter. So the two clauses don't conflict. So the Mishnah ruled that we appoint an agent to render the animal a muad. If it goes as a muad, the victim collects full damages. So the Gemara now cites a dispute regarding this ruling. From whose choice property is the payment taken? Rav Yochanan said, from the choice property of the orphans. It is they who bear responsibility and are liable to pay for the damages. Okay? But Rav Chanina said, from the choice property of the agent, it is he who must pay the damages. Okay? And we already discussed some of the reasons. So the Gemara questions the accuracy of the citation, but did Rav Yochanan really truly say this? For Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav Asi, the court does not involve itself with collecting debts from the property of minor orphans unless interest payments are consuming it. But Rav Yochanan said the court involves itself both to repay an interest-bearing note because the interest payments consume the property, or to repay the ketubah of a woman because the support payments consume the property. So, all right, guys, we already explained that an orphan, you can't collect a debt from minor orphans, okay, and movable property. The only time we do that is if the father, the late father, borrowed money from a non-Jew and the interest payments would actually cripple the estate. So they just want to get it over and done with. Or the ketubah of a woman, maybe the husband remarried and he left some of the money to the children. But you have to look after this woman that was left with the ketubah until you pay her the ketubah. So you have to make sure that her, her monthly needs are met. Does that make sense? So that could also suck up the asset because it could be 20 grand a month. And if you don't wind it up for years, it could be 100 grand after 5 months, and she might only be entitled to 100,000 rands worth of once-off payment. So those are the circumstances at which you would pay off movable property. In all other cases, the court does not exact payment from the property of orphans. We see that Rav Yochanan holds that the court does not collect debts from the property of minor orphans. How then can Rav Yochanan rule that the payment for damage is taken from their property? The Gemara concedes, I will reverse the opinions as follows. Rav Yochanan said, the payment is taken from choice property of the agents. Rav Yossi Bar Chanina said, it is taken from the choice property of the orphans. According to this amendation, Rav Yochanan rules that the agent, not the orphans who must pay, thus his rulings are not contradictory. So the Gemara is not happy with this. It says, look, Rav has said, because one ruling of Rav Yochanan contradicts another ruling of Rav Yochanan, you represent Rav Yossi Bar Chanina as erring. But Rav Yossi Bar Chanina is a judge, and as such he plumbs the depths of law. He certainly would not obligate the orphans to pay. So Rava continues, rather you really do not reverse the opinions of Rav Yochanan and Rav Yossi Bar Chanina. As for the contradiction between Rav Yochanan's two rulings, one who damages is different, his law is more stringent. Therefore, although Rav Yochanan generally does not permit the court to collect debts from the property of orphans, where the property of orphans has inflicted damage, he does permit it. So what he's saying there is as follows, is look, that's between somebody that is owed money and the minor orphans. That doesn't affect society as large. The minute that you've got people that are mentally incompetent having animals running around causing havoc, that is something that has to pay for because that's affecting society at large. So there's a difference between the rules of damages and the rules of creditors. Okay? The Gemara explains the reasoning underlying the dispute between Rav Yochanan and Rav Yossi Bar Chanina. This is why Rav Yochanan said that the payment is taken from choice property of the orphans, because if you say it is taken from the choice property of the agent, people will refuse and not allow themselves to be appointed agents, lest they be compelled to pay damages. But Rav Yossi Bar Chanina says the payment is taken from choice property of the agent, and we go back and collect from the orphans when they become adults. We then repay the agent. Now, the only thing I don't understand there is that's fine if you're dealing with a minor.
Yeah.
That becomes an adult. What happens if somebody never becomes sane? How do they come to the point where they now become competent to take money from them?
They might never. That's the problem.
Yeah.
Those two categories. With both those categories, you've got a problem.
Yeah, so all we're saying is that exactly that. Rav Yochanan is not doing a contradiction. There's a difference between what the rule is with creditors and damages. And we even see this with property. Damages are entitled to choice property. They never chose to give the loan. They were damaged against their will. So therefore, they get the highest grade land so they can convert it into cash quickly. A person that gives a loan has a choice. And therefore, he gets average quality land at which to sell. The person didn't choose to be damaged. And in fact, we learned biblically he gets lower quality of land. The rabbis upgraded him to medium quality land, the creditor, so that he wouldn't be, deterred from lending to the poor, so that he could convert it to cash. Okay? So we can end off on this note. Look, guys, a lot of what I'm saying here might be a repetition of what I summarized, but I thought me summarizing made sense. I don't know what you guys think.
No, perfect for me. The other guys?
Look, obviously, Rav Yossi Bar Chanina is basically saying, listen, the agent should pay. At the end of the day, it was his irresponsibility. Why did mentally incompetent people have to pay? Because of his responsibility. I agree with him completely. But then nobody's going to step up to the plate and do the job.
Hey, like the paid custodian, we learned earlier.
Yeah, but the problem is, it seems from here, especially if they take jurisdiction of the animal, is that I don't think they're really paid really that much. I think they might be given a bit of food for the animal, but they seem to take it into their property, and therefore they're not paid like custodians that watch it on somebody else's property. They're doing a favor. Yeah, they're doing a favor. So you don't want to then, when somebody's doing a favor and looking after something of yours, we remember the more favor they're doing you, the less you hold them liable. The more you're doing them a favor, the more you hold them liable. Listen, guys, we did a good session. I hope it was clear. I made this as simple and straightforward as possible. It really is straightforward.
Yeah, listen, I just want to make a comment. I just think that the agent is the agents that are appointed are probably wealthier people, and they do it as a chesed, obviously. And once it's in their land, they do have that responsibility to make sure it doesn't damage. So if it does damage in their land, they shouldn't take on that agency then, because once they take it on, I don't see it being a problem with one or two views there saying that you can't take the property, you can't take it from his choice land, and he can claim it back. It's only it's fine when it's a minor who can become an adult, but it is a problem like what you said when it's not a minor, when it's an insane person or a person that is gone, same type of thing, just semi-retarded. These guys are not going to come right. So there I do see a problem. But it is at the end of the day on that guy's land. He needs to look after whatever's on his land.
Yeah, I agree.
So I'm just saying I kind of get that angle as well. It seems unfair, but then in a way it's also fair. I think most of these agents would have been wealthier guys. That's why. And they could have a cattle of 100 to 1,000 even oxen. So to add one more won't kill them.
I agree with you.
And they've probably got much stronger infrastructure, better fencing, better people watching.
Yeah, I still find it difficult that if they're more wealthy, that you shouldn't make them pay half or something. I don't quite understand. I don't quite understand why they're off the hook. Apparently, the Gemara says, one of the commentaries saying that if the incompetents have to pay this person will feel so guilty, he's not going to allow to create damage a second time. I don't know. I don't know what to say.
Yeah, it's quite tricky. I think you did a good job because I read it, and I think what you did was good.